What's going on, everybody? It's Matt 10. So, I've got Madden 20 sliders here. I know for YouTube I've got these out just once, I believe, for the first version for my YouTube side of things, but if you visit Operation Sports, you would have found me going through about 20 or more versions of my sliders, and I usually, that's how I do it. I'll usually do all the research and do all the, kind of testing and everything, and then post the findings on my forum, on my thread on Operation Sports. And then once I feel it's been good, I give it a decent amount of time, get enough sample size, and then I'll get it ready for YouTube, because to me that's like production. That's kind of like I'm not going to say final, that's a bad word, especially when you work with sliders. Nothing's ever final. We're going to play on All-Madden or All-Pro, because I do like to use All-Pro for home games and All-Madden for away games. Game style is at simulation with quarter length of 13 minutes, and then accelerate clock at on. Usually I have it off and I'll play 10 minutes, but I really like the accelerated clock. I have to give credit to my buddy Josh and then Raider Ren, who are both on the Operation Sports forums, and they really gave me some insight about injuries and how it impacts gameplay. Naturally, I'm not just going to go with what people suggest. I'm going to use that as a baseline and then find my best balance relative to my set. This is really important. Injuries in the main menu, so here in the game options on the main menu, have to be at 5. And I'll explain injuries. Basically, what injuries is, in the main menu, it controls the overall profile of your Madden profile and how it lets the animations play out. Okay, I know it sounds like tinfoil hat type of commentary, but it's true. You will notice the game will play a little bit more reserved, a little bit calmer. Not that it's not aggressive, but just more so calmer in that sense. On the main menu. But then the important part is we change it on the franchise side. So when we import this value, we're then going to change it on the franchise side. But what this really helps with, and you'll notice this right away, is the calm down animations and how smooth the animations get. You really get some amazing foot planning, amazing momentum. It's really brilliant. It's probably the reason why I really like what Raider Ren and Josh really got into here. Really gave me an understanding, and I'm a big animations guy. Of course, animations to me are kind of that triggering of logic about to happen. And then what we'll do in franchise is put it at 40, and that will actually, one, it's going to help, with the aggression, but not so high that everybody's just trying to go, hurt themselves. And then, of course, we find that balance to use it so there are injuries. So we can't do 5-5, and get, people, or get the players really kind of reserved and being afraid to get injured. So the best balance I've found is 5 here in the main menu and then 40 in the franchise side. Trust me, it works. It's a brilliant thing. And going from there is fatigue. And it kind of balances out what I've been trying with fatigue in my thread. I've moved this up all the way to 60. While I love what it does for the subs, this actually kind of hurt in a sense of the animations that would play out. And you'd see guys start to jog in random spots. And then from here, in the last option in the game options is player speed, parity scale. I call it threshold, like it's always been called, is at 48. Now, 48 is really, it's like, we went all the way from, if the previous video, we went pretty high threshold. But like I mentioned earlier, we always have to be dynamic with sliders. There's no final ever with sliders, unfortunately. You have to decide, you as the user. Let me, be stuck here in Fantasyland that something's going to be final. But more so, you have to kind of figure out what it is you like, and as long as it ticks all those boxes, good to go. Leave it alone, run with it. But with speed disparity scale, or threshold, as I like to call it, is that when we had it really high, it was working for the older patches and the title updates. But now, it doesn't work anymore. They've made changes. They've made sync issues or sync adjustments, from quarterbacks to reactions of the DBs to the quarterback's arm movement. There's so many different things at play now compared to the previous sliders that I've had to keep adjusting here. And so eventually I found myself really going all over the place with threshold, as I always do. Anytime a patch update comes out, I'm always staying at default, and then I'll adjust to my previous values to see if they still hold true. Threshold was one of those that just could not be kept very high, because this patch update made everybody who used a higher threshold just be way too in sync, meaning an offensive lineman would be way ahead of the receiver if they caught the ball. So they'd catch at the 30, the lineman would be up at the 40 by then. And it just wouldn't make sense. So at 48, it's been the best balance of that. It's not quite default, but it's just a little bit lower to get some separation there. And just a little bit of separation makes all the difference in the world. And then it's about skill of the player, a DB guarding covering a receiver, and how soon how quickly, or whatever skill set they have to get to the receiver, get to the ball, make a play on the ball, etc. But I found this is the best balance. It also helps the offensive line, defensive line interaction, and so I like 48. It's been really good so far, and plenty of sample size with it. Well, next, we're going to go through penalties. I might have described this a little bit in the previous video of my Madden 20 sliders, but I always tell myself I'm not going to modify these too much, but honestly, they make such a difference to gameplay that over time I just decided, you know what, I know enough about penalties, and I feel confident what I'm doing with them, that it's going to make for better gameplay. Offside is at 99. Now this value, I've used this value for a lot of my sets, versions of my set. And what this really does is, one, it really builds some great, it's kind of the fundamental of building the offensive line and defensive line interaction. This primarily calls for the defensive line. And it only works with a high false start as well in relative to the offensive line and defensive line interaction. The reason for that is because false start, the animation that plays out when you do a false start, is the offensive lineman raises up. Now, when they raise up, that's a false start, right? But if they have a defensive lineman coming at them via offsides animation, they then engage right away. Then you pair that up with the offensive holding. Who's going to disengage sooner? The offensive line. But they're also going to be met with resistance. So that's why you see some just absolutely incredible interactions in the trenches, which is kind of what I love about working on football, working on Madden, NCAA back in the day, of just creating these interactions, and they look just so organic. And then pair that up with the gameplay sliders, in which I've got them lower for the first time in a long time. It really just makes for just dynamic play, and you just never know what's going to happen. It's not going to be where it's a stuck animation in which there's suction blocked into a block and just standing up, as I call it, playing patty cake. And so these three values are super important. Yes, they get called as they should, but it won't be that many. I promise you. It's probably, I'd say the most I've ever seen was probably 8 penalties in total from these three, and that's all together. And honestly, that's football. Sometimes they're just not players aren't ever can't always be in sync, or they're making desperate plays. You just never know, and I think that's what's beautiful about sports. How it should be for football. But then after that, we get a little bit easier in comparison to those three values. Illegal block in the back, this is just to include another penalty that can happen. It's a very common one. It doesn't get called as often, but it will get called, which is a good thing. Defensive pass interference, I've been a lot of places with this, honestly. But I've found that on this most recent title update, you can lower it. The fact that it gets called is a beautiful thing, because you played any Madden or NCAA, defensive pass interference was something, as soon as you're watching it and it shows up and it gets called, I don't know about you guys, but I'm grabbing a screenshot and I'm starting to record it, because those were rare things and I loved them. Significant value, though, with my set is intentional grounding. I have that set to off. It doesn't get called anyway, so just turn it off, but not just for that. It makes the quarterback extend plays more, meaning they'll scramble out of the pocket. They're going to give you a challenge because they don't want to just give up, and they're not just going to stay in the pocket and get sacked. And this is a value. I have gone back and forth, but I finally feel really good where it's at because of how it makes the quarterback play more dynamic. And that's a big thing with this set overall, is just how we can get more dynamic gameplay. Just going to go into the player sliders, but I'm going to do that via the gameplay sliders and franchise just so you can kind of see them together. QB actually at 50 a piece, as you can see, for the player skill and CPU skill. Now, really, I've mentioned this in my thread, of course, but the quarterback value to me is more so representative of the quarterback position. They are the general on the field. You are, everything you do dictates based on what the general on the field is saying. They're the leaders. And I feel like that's the overall attitude the computer is going to play with based on this value. From there, it's a matter of getting all the other values on point, because people see 50 and they're like, oh man, Robo QB right away. The thing is, Robo QB, just because a value is at 50 doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. It just means that the intent is going to be higher. So you're going to see the quarterback for the CPU, for example, is going to try more things, throw deeper passes, throw into coverage more, because their intent is to get more yards. Their intent is to be more aggressive in that sense. But then you can see some quarterbacks who just want high completions. That's because they want to keep the ball moving. They're going to get the ball to those who can play make if they don't see anybody down the field. This is very basic football knowledge of any kind of, anything really. It's just to get completions. And people want to call that Robo QB. I don't think that's necessarily the right way. It's Robo QB if there's nobody near the player that's being thrown to, or if there's an animation problem which the receiver can just blast away from the coverage. QB actually is at 50, and I feel like if you go under this, you're going to miss out. So next we have pass blocking at 25, and I'm going to also cover run blocking in this instance. Now, pass blocking at 25 is the lowest I've gone in a long time for my slider sets. I don't usually like to adjust the blocking values because mainly to me, because I feel like the linemen don't make, they don't get beat in the right sense. They end up getting dumber essentially. But that doesn't seem to be the case here with Madden 20, which is nice. They do miss some assignments just because of the flow of what's happening in the trenches. People are going to talk about sacks, etc. I mean, that depends on how long your routes are developing. It depends on how long the computer's routes are developing. The computer may play safer options because they have less time in the pocket. So they're going to try to find, those dump offs a lot more, the tight end more often. Again, their intent is to beat you and to get yardage. So, people talk about like, oh, they maybe go to the tight end too often, they're running back too often. Well, yeah, they're trying to make plays, and if they don't see anybody downfield, there's a reason for that. That means you had good coverage. You should be happy that they're trying to dump off certain things. And run blocking really is the same exact setup in that regard to it's about kind of these slight blocks, and everything's not going to be patty cake and suction blocked and anything like that. You will have to make your space. You will have to hit your holes. The computer has to do the same. The computer will surprise you on how dynamic they can be, and then how terrible they can be as well, which is great because it humanizes them, which is a big part of any slider I create. And the next value from there is receiver catching, both at 50, as you can see. And receiver catching really is similar to the QB. It's not just about successful catches, but it's also within the rating of the ability of the receiver. I got tired of seeing the same kind of drop animation in which the receiver would catch it and then be, while they're still midair, straight-legged defensive back would then slap it out of their hand and they'd jump out of nowhere. That animation does happen sometimes. It's kind of annoying, but it's not to the point that it's always a drop. The receiver is going to hold on to it. The user has the advantage usually in the receiver side of things because they can press R1 and just hold on to the ball, while the computer doesn't really have that. So they're more at the mercy of the ratings playing out. Truly, there's no real input in that sense. What I like as well about this value is that you get exactly the full range of what you expect at this value of your player ratings. So for me, it's more so about playing true to ratings. The good thing is I'm not seeing a whole bunch of one-handed catches. I'm not seeing a whole bunch of diving catches. But most of the time, especially in NFL and in college, the receiver always has the advantage over the defensive back. Why? Because they know what route they're going to be running versus the defensive back. And that's what's, I think that's something Madden needs to capture is kind of that better, even harder interaction between the DB and the receiver. Just because, they get away, the defensive back gets away with just a lot of holding. And I wish there could be something that could control that. Now, there is defensive holding, or there used to be defensive holding. And you might have seen this in some of the previous videos, but it's not there anymore in this title update. And I had used it extensively to test to kind of get that holding of the defender holding the receiver, but it's not there anymore. So this is kind of the best we got here with the receiver catching at 50. Fumbles is at 50 apiece, and the reason for that is simply I don't want them to get into the mode where they're trying to cover up right away. This is the running backs, of course, but also the receivers. Like, there will be a time and a place to cover up, and I felt like I had it at a value. I think I had it at 52, and I think I had it at 55 at one point. And before this title update, where they made the hit sticks super easy to become fumbles, it just didn't make sense to have it higher anymore, because I felt like it was inhibiting their ability overall to kind of make moves, to kind of hit the hole, etc. They kind of just, when they cover up, the computer in particular, when they cover up, they kind of just stop running. They keep their legs moving somehow, but they kind of just don't have a purpose in a sense. They just don't want to lose the ball. And there's kind of, that'll happen at the end of the game. Some kind of weird things about end of the game in general with Madden this year. But that animation that can pop up definitely shouldn't happen early on in the game, etc. So I've kept it at 50 here just to keep things simple and let it all play out, let the ratings play out, and the organic offensive line, defensive line interaction control how the running back's going to behave. The only discrepancy on the All-Madden setup here is the pass defense reaction. This is at 62 for the user, the player skill, if you will, and 52 for the computer. And reason for this is, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that simply on All-Madden, the computer does really well at swatting the ball, reacting to the ball. They do pretty good. There's some weird animations out there, more legacy animations of the out of the box in general, where they're kind of too aggressive to get to the ball in the air. I think it's something to do with the linebacker coding this year, in which they're not able to get super high and deflect passes, which is good. We didn't like that. But I think they kind of let a little bit that seep into the defensive backs as well, unfortunately, and safeties. But pass defense reaction at 62 definitely helps the user to react. It's not to the point that everything is a batted down ball. Sometimes they'll watch the receiver because they didn't look back to see where the ball was. So it's a good balance for me, and I think it's not something I'm going to change, or unless absolutely necessary. Now, for the All-Pro, if you're playing on All-Pro, it's just going to be 52 a piece, and that's really simply because All-Pro it's a little bit easier. I say easy with kind of please take that as a measured input there, but 52 is a good value, and you could probably go to 62 if you really want to see that animation pop out more. But the quarterback's not as fantastic as it is in All-Madden that you're facing up against in the computer, but it still works. And so if you'd rather not have to go in here every time, you're more than welcome to just leave it at 62. It shouldn't hurt. All right, next value is interceptions at 38. Simply, I'll tell you, because 40 was too high. 40 became just too many interceptions. You will still definitely get punished. Don't worry. Throw it to defender, they will try to catch the ball. Sometimes they'll have brick hands, as they should, and not catch the ball. So it's completely all over, which as it should be, because you just never know. It can be on so many different things. That's another thing with quarterback accuracy at 50 is you get more hard driven throws, you'll get some lobbed throws, and it just makes the ball physics stand out as it should. And that does impact certain values, such as interceptions, such as pass defense reaction. So that's the value I'm sticking at. I've had it at 40, like I said. I've had it at 50. I've had it lower into the 20s. So this is just a balancing act. And 38 has been a really good, solid point. Good mix of everything. So pass coverage is 50. It's been here for a while. If I'm consistent in anything for my sliders, it's been that I've left this alone. That's not to say I haven't had any attention on it. If anything, the first thing I keep adjusting, if I see any coverage issues, I literally will play with this for a long time. And I will work on this simply on default sliders, default threshold and modify pass coverage and find it in 5-point increments to see what it does. And I've done it to all heck in this title update and nothing's happening. The last values for the skills here is tackling at 50. This is another value that I've played around with all over the place. I like the title update addressing the hit stick, superstars, etc. And you know, to me, tackling is kind of like, I love tackling because when you see just the physics of tackling, you know you've got your threshold on the right track, you've got some other values on the right track. Some of the best animations come from a lower tackling value, but unfortunately, when you lower that tackle value, you also lose like pursuit angles of realism. You get some really bad pursuit angles. Then you also get some really unrealistic looking broken tackles, like, you know, big defensive linemen, you know, getting basically getting shrugged off by Darren Sproles. That's not to say that it doesn't happen, but you know, that animation just doesn't make sense. And so that's what can happen. It's a very volatile value. I've decided to leave it just as it is. And very quickly, field goal power at 50, field goal accuracy at 48. Got to see some misses, especially as the computer loves to try to hit those from 60-plus yards. Punt power, don't really need to adjust this too much. The threshold's low enough that there's enough time to get under the ball, enough time to set up blocks, etc. Punt accuracy, 48. Kickoff power, 50. So just a good balance of everything. And this is what I was talking about way earlier in the video, was injuries at 40. So remember, we have it at 5. This is super important, guys. Remember, so 5 in the main menu, and then 40 here in the franchise. And again, why 40, or why the discrepancy? Why 5 in the main menu and why 40 here in franchise? Because 5 controls the foot planning, overall animations, the smoothest in animations as you go low, and then 40 here in the franchise. This is what controls the overall attitude of the game. You know, they're going to go all out. You know, if you have this at 50 plus, usually 55 plus, you can get away with 51, but you may run into some slight issues on occasion, animation wise. But if you go too high, you're going to see, obviously you're going to see injuries naturally, but you're also going to see them kind of, as a result, get those injuries because they're just going crazy. They're just, you know, running into walls, etc., and not caring about what happens to them. So 40 is the best balance I could find. I have had this lower. I've had this at 20. I've had this at 30. So I've definitely done my due diligence here, because I was super intrigued by this value. I'm not going to go into it again. I spent a lot of time explaining it earlier, but I was super intrigued by this value. So anytime I get intrigued by sliders, I'm going to spend a long time researching it. So there was a time in which I didn't update my thread for almost a week, just addressing that. I was just testing like crazy, and I love this value for what it is. And you will see injuries. You will see a variety of injuries. The computer will get injured. It's a beautiful setup. And, you know, there you go. That's the rest of the sliders all taken care of. Like I said earlier, you know, definitely see as you adjust and what you'd like to adjust to, what you're looking for. Definitely leave comments below, or go to the, you know, Operation Sports slider thread, and go to the Operation Sports in general. Go to the slider section. We've got some amazing contributors, amazing guys out there. I've already mentioned a couple of them. And, you know, just be part of the community. It's what it's just all about. And, you know, mine is just one of the slider sets, and there's so many out there. None of them are like better than the other, etc. To me, it's all about sample size. I'll tell you, you know, especially as I've received a lot of feedback on my sliders over time, I take every feedback with kind of a grain of salt, because for me, it's sample size. So if you're going to give really good feedback, give me an idea of how long you've been playing with the slider set exactly, because that's going to tell me exactly how you experienced it and whether we're in line together. All slider values are relative to one another. So feedback, think about, you know, are you using the exact set? What have you changed? Every little bit can count and make a big difference. So, but again, love to hear your feedback, guys. Make sure to leave your comments below, like the video. Also, if you don't mind checking out my Patreon, I just started that. I'd love it if you could support me in that sense. I humbly oblige to those who have pressured me into getting it. I really appreciate them. I've got a couple supporters, my awesome supporters. I call them sim snobs because we are simulation snobs. And so, you know, that's been different for me, but it's nice. And my goals on that, of course, I've said it on there, but my goal really is to have kind of giveaways, have random acts of kindness, and any kind of donations. I'm not going to use this, for my own money or anything like that. It's really so I can give back, and I love giving back. I've bought many games for people over the years, just kind of what I do. I love doing that kind of thing, where somebody will just say, hey, can somebody get this game for me? And I'll just be like, yeah, let me get it for you. Give me your info. I love doing that. So, and I think that's just part of the world we live in, and the world I want to live in, and I want my boys to see that there's good in the world, and hopefully I can represent that. But anyway, off my soapbox. I appreciate you guys watching the video, and hopefully this all made sense. Let me know, comments below. Take care and stay tuned.